But if you have, but it can be, but if you have, but it can be, but if you have, but it can be funny. Hello and welcome to Story Weavers, the podcast where we discuss anything and everything story related.
Here, we'll delve into inspiration, plots, structure, character, and dialogue, be it in books, movies, music, comics, television, or anything else. We'll be covering it from conception to reception.
We'll be discussing between ourselves as well as with other creators and fans about their experiences, routines, and techniques. Join us and find your next inspiration. We're your hosts, Dean Bradley
and John William Worth.
And this is Story Weavers.
Hello, and welcome back to Story Weavers, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything story, from film and television to literature and comics. We're your hosts, John Worth and Dean Bradley, and today's episode we'll be talking about The Office, particularly the US version, which aired from 2005 to 2013, but we'll also be touching on the original UK version, which aired for 2 seasons or series from 2001 to 2003. For those unfamiliar with the show, so probably not very many of you, the show follows a paper producing company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. A documentary crew goes in to just film the daily office life of the workers. Their boss is Steve Carell, the actor Steve Carell, and the cast also includes John Krasinski, Jenna Fisher, and Rainn Wilson, among many, many others.
You've got Craig Robinson, is in the show. Who else? Will Ferrell makes an appearance.
He takes over for Steve Carell later on after Steve Carell left.
I mean, it's Mindy Kaling, BJ Novak. I mean, stacked cast.
And when the show first started, they weren't that. When the show first started, they weren't that big. Like Steve Carell, I think, was the biggest name at the time. But even then,
Craig Robinson had been on SNL, I think. So people knew who he was, but he was only kind of a secondary character that didn't start getting regular roles until a little later into the show.
Mm-hmm. So basically the show is just about a documentary crew filming the lives, the comings and goings in this office. And
oh, go ahead. I'll let you.
And I was going to say, while the UK version only aired for 2 seasons, the US version went on for 9 seasons.
Yes.
So the US version definitely did go for longer. And it started the careers of pretty much everyone in that show is now, if not a household name, because I watched The Office, but I didn't follow it very closely. But every single actor in there, it's I recognize them. I know who they are in The Office. Chili Guy, the warehouse guys. It's I know all of them, and it's every single time I see them, it's I chuckle no matter what they're in, because it's oh, Office. So to say that The Office, particularly the US version, made a big impact on sitcoms is a very, very big understatement. It's one of those influential shows in my mind that ranks up there with Breaking Bad and Tales from the Crypt and Game of Thrones. That's a cultural touchstone.
They were just big, cultural.
A moment in
phenomena.
time where you could see okay, this happened, and the trajectory of the landscape
industry changed. Exactly. Yes. Well, let's start on a point you mentioned a minute ago about how the British version only ran for 2 series, but the US version continued on for 9, and as many people think, too long after Steve Carell left, because a lot of the people they got in to replace him. The thing with The Office was that Steve Carell was such a uniquely written character. He was a lovable buffoon who did everything in his power to not make himself look bad by typically making himself look worse in trying to remedy the situation. And then, they brought in Will Ferrell as, was his name Dwayne, I think? Something like that. Correction. Will Ferrell's character was D'Angelo, not Dwayne, Dean.
Just a quick note for everyone. So how I said, I know The Office, but I didn't follow it. Dean here, you are a lover of The Office, so you're very knowledgeable.
Yes,
of the show,
I came into it much later, actually. Surprisingly, the first few times I saw The Office back when it was on air, I was not a fan. I didn't like that type of humor at that time in my life. It made me very uncomfortable, and I don't think I appreciated the satire the way I do today. It's something we'll get into, but I mean, there are a couple episodes in the early seasons that I don't think any company would produce and air nowadays. But that being said, like even now when you watch them, like they're cringy, but their commentary on the office workplace and all the things that can come with that, including racism and sexism, etc.
As a random note, sorry if I keep interrupting.
No, you're good.
But so one of the things that I remember, because I haven't seen any episodes of the BBC version of The Office.
I've seen
with Ricky Gervais, and I believe Martin Freeman played the equivalent of the Jim role in the BBC version.
Right.
From what I understand, the Ricky Gervais's character in the BBC Office was not exactly a likable guy. And in the first season or two of the US Office, Steve Carell was not that kind of lovable buffoon that he became in the later seasons. He started off closer to...
Yeah, definitely. He had some he had some characteristics where you could kind of tell he was trying to do right, but he wouldn't sacrifice his ego or his position as the manager, for anything.
Yeah.
So, but eventually, like all the characters definitely grew and,
softened out possibly a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, eventually they brought on characters. They brought on, Ed Helms' character, Andy, which in many moments is absolutely hilarious. He adds a great new, comedic element, but again, in the later seasons they kind of just take his character like off the deep end, doing just these crazy ridiculous things that I think that was part of it too, not just Steve Carell leaving, but so many of the situations they put them in, it got to the point where it wasn't your normal day-to-day situations, trying to figure out how to throw a birthday party for someone, or having to be lectured on doing something wrong or making sales or whatever it was. And they started getting into these weird, crazy storylines that was just like it didn't
jump the shark.
Yeah, it didn't seem like your average normal office anymore, which was supposed to be the point. The whole idea is you've got quirky people that all want different things. They have to find a way to interact, to make upper management happy. The company's making money. People can keep their jobs. And that's what it all boils down to.
Right. So that would lead us into one of the questions, actually, would be, because British humor and American humor is very, very different. Yes, obviously.
It's different in the way it's received in the US versus the UK is also very different.
How we were just talking about like how Steve Carell's character changed over the show, like you could say softened a little bit. Definitely. And all the other characters kind of softened as well. They still had their kind of like characteristics, but they were made more palatable. Do you think that's one of the examples of the transition from the British kind of humor to American humor, where like British is much more kind of like very dry and it's not afraid to kind of like not just poke someone, but poke a hole in them? Or,
sure. I mean, in the early seasons of The Office, I mean, they definitely did that. The second episode is on racism, and they bring in
very light subject,
a black actor to give a racism seminar, and Steve Carell's character Michael Scott just starts going off and doing was it Eddie Murphy, I think, or Chris Rock, starts doing like Chris Rock things, and it's very culturally inappropriate, but it was funny. But it was that same kind of thing. But I haven't seen enough of the BBC version to know. But a lot of their humor is less on the nose. A lot of American humor is much more on the nose, and it's much more on the nose about social issues. Sometimes they kind of bang your head into it.
Yes.
But it can be funny, and I think it's okay as long as you understand why it's funny.
I would say a lot of it also, like, because I've seen several BBC shows and some like older like British comedies, and some of it's just very, very topical. So it also just comes from the separation of, two different countries, different time periods. And it's like they'll make fun of Margaret Thatcher when she was prime minister, and then we'll watch it today and be like, what are they talking about? And
I mean, it's no different than when
exactly
we were
American
Bush,
humor, making fun of
Bush
Bush or Obama or
right.
other simple people to make fun of. But yeah, so
let's let you answer a couple questions since I've been talking a little bit. Let's look at the at the production side of things. We're talking budget, we're talking sets, we're talking cast and directors. So when you're filming not just a TV show but a sitcom specifically, like what are considerations that you have to make that might be different from, say, a feature film, aside from the fact that you're not just filming 90 minutes of final footage, you're filming 20 to 22 minutes of final footage at least once a week, or to be released at least once a week.
So I have not worked on a sitcom, but I wrote a script, like a pilot episode for a sitcom that never got off the ground. And the first thing would be how you said, they come out like every week. So if you're filming spontaneously, it's got to be quick, very quick.
I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you do either, but when they're filming sitcoms, and it may be different now in 2023 than it was back in 2005, but are they filming the episodes like 1 or 2 weeks before they're released and editing that quickly, or or they
that I'm not sure. I mean, I
don't know
if they
record whole seasons ahead of time before they start releasing. Because I know sitcoms are different than, say, an HBO or a Netflix series that, does a 12-season thing. But I know for sure all of those are recorded ahead of time, but they're not being
I would say most of them are filmed ahead of time, especially now, because one of the things, like how you mentioned, like filming, the difference between when The Office was filmed versus now, 2005, digital technology wasn't quite out yet. They were still using tape. So one, you might not see as many bloopers from back then, and things were much more economical, like let's try to hit the mark as soon as we can, or they would incorporate those bloopers into the show, which is a testament to like the acting. Like if Steve Carell screws up, he'll play into it, because again, tape is everything. You're using a physical medium, and time is of the essence, which is the other thing with sitcoms. You want to use as few locations as possible, with as few actors as possible, as infrequently, because it's all about
because of budget. And economy. Yeah. Well, and also, if you're filming however many times a week to do a show, not only do you have to be able to pay all of them, but you have to make sure that everyone is there on the day of filming. If you're missing one character on a shoot, you have to find another scene to film.
Exactly. Well, that's why all of them would sign a contract saying, you must commit to this show at this time. And it's,
people get sick and things happen. And from what I know,
you'd be surprised on sets, even with films, actors are kind of, it's a horrible thing, but they're kind of expected to show up even when they're sick, because I've heard of actors redubbing their lines because they had a stuffy nose, so they sounded a little bit like this, and then they redub it later. Because again, when you're talking about, because I know feature films, you're talking possibly hundreds of millions of dollars. I've got a cold. It should be an acceptable reason, but when you're dealing with that much money, you've got all these people relying on you, even
tight
sitcoms.
Deadlines.
Exactly, especially with sitcoms, very tight deadlines. Because even if you film it ahead of time, you still have to do reshoots. There might be editing. You might have to dub stuff in. And with, the premiere date or the release date coming up closer and closer and closer, it's you're very down to the wire. So looking at The Office, it's the perfect kind of sitcom because it's in literally one location. It has
though you do see, not to interrupt you too quickly, but when it comes to location filming, you see it regularly with a lot of different sitcoms. Once they finally start getting popular and they're getting a bigger budget, you'll notice as seasons go on, they'll start having more episodes every season that are shot in different locations. In The Office, you get the one where they go to the beach to do all the connectivity training, or they go onto the ship when Pam, or not Pam, Jim breaks up with the girl, and all and they kiss and all this stuff.
See, you just said locations. You just said two of the magic. Well, I know you said one of them. I don't know about the other. You said budget. increases because of popularity, which also leads to contracts. Because the first season or two, when the show is kind of like starting out, it happens with all the shows. Like, what was that show with like Archie Bunker? All in the Family?
Yes.
I believe.
Yep.
Which I like that show too, FYI. But the first season or two
on Nick at Night.
Yeah, the seasons were like, okay, yeah, try to show up to this, but the actors took it seriously, but not really. But then once the show starts to get big, then the actors are much more inclined to be a part of the show. They prioritize it, and as you said, the budgets get bigger, so you can
they're getting better times on cable
you can
television,
take more time to film as well, because the studio, or not studio, but like the network will look at them and say, okay, you want to do this, that's good because you're raking in the money. The good thing is that like with The Office, how like you were mentioning, like there were episodes where they started to kind of jump the shark. I don't think they ever should I tell people what jump the shark means just in case they don't know?
Yeah.
Okay. So jump the shark is an industry term in reference to happy days. It means when a show has gone completely off the rails. Because in Happy Days, everyone kind of knows what Happy Days is about, 1950s teenagers, woo. But there's one episode towards the end where Fonzie jumps over a shark on water skis. And it's the whole point.
I actually didn't know that.
The show just went completely off the rails and it lost. It was like at its lowest point in ratings. So they're doing everything to try to claw back the audience. So that's what jumping the shark means. Gotcha. The Office I feel like it got close to that point, but it never quite did that because it kept everything within like that little bubble. And part of it, I think, like how I just looked it up just a few moments ago, a lot of the cast were writers on the show. So they always kept it within their little realm. Like, okay, these characters are who are important. That's what people keep coming back for. Yeah, they don't come back because the set design is cool. They come back because we're funny. And they care.
I mean, BJ Novak is a main writer, and I don't know if he was a producer on the show or not, but I know he was a writer. I know Mindy Kaling was a writer, and originally, Mindy Kaling was just, her character was just sitting in the back corner office, next to HR, and she had a couple lines here and there, and BJ Novak came in partway through just like as a temp, but a lot of the first season, Okay, we just want to take a brief moment to remind everybody about our book of the month this month. For this month, we are going to be reading The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. So this takes place in around 1939, 1940.
1941, I think.
Yeah.
To early 1941.
And focuses on Winston Churchill as he becomes Prime Minister of England at the beginning of World War II and the impending German invasion of Britain and the London bombings. And we get a nice view into Churchill and his family's personal lives. We get a little glimpse into some of the personal lives of high-ranking members of the Third Reich and the Nazis, and we get a nice view of some Londoners in London. This is a nonfiction book, but it is written similar to in the style of a narrative. It is designed to read like a story, but it is nonfiction. But I guarantee you it is not dry. I'm a little bit into it so far, and it's absolutely fantastic.
As a slow reader myself, I'm actually proud. I've been keeping pace with Dean pretty well for this book of the month. I think I'm on page about 200, 250 at this point. And I'm not as big of a nonfiction reader, but I am an Erik Larson fan, and I love his work. I can agree this is definitely not a dry read. It's super insightful and very entertaining.
Yeah, so we will get back to our episode now, but we just wanted to give you that quick reminder. This month we are reading The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. So there's actually this really cool podcast out there called The Office Ladies with Jenna Fisher and Angela Kinsey, which play the characters of Pam and Angela, respectively. And it's a really fun episode. The two of them became like very, very close friends from working together on The Office. Actually, most of the cast is very good friends, and they all still keep in contact, show up for each other's birthdays year after year, things like that. Like, real sweet. And the format of the podcast is every episode is the episode of The Office in sequence, and they basically go through like their favorite scenes and moments, things they remember from that time. Like, it's a really fun episode. It's probably been a year or so since I've listened to it, but I remember one of the things early on that they talk about was how after they shot the pilot, like they didn't hear anything for like 6 or 8 months.
That's normal,
and none of them really expected it to go off. They were just, a lot of them were like waitressing, as many aspiring actors and actresses do in Hollywood. And then when they did get called back, they were kind of blown away. And I think a lot of the writing, BJ and Mindy and the other writers, I think a lot of them I don't even know if they had full episode scripts for an entire season, but I think they definitely had a few. And a lot of what ended up showing up on film was improv.
Well, you said some of them had SNL backgrounds too, right?
Yeah, Craig Robinson was on SNL.
Yeah, Mindy Kaling, I think, guest starred on SNL. BJ Novak, I think, before The Office. They released in the writers' rooms.
Yeah, so a lot of these people that, at least the writers and producers were experienced. And it's kind of like one of those just perfect storm deals. They were able to get a great cast of characters. When they started off, a lot of their main characters, aside from Steve Carell, were pretty much unknown. So they had, budgets to use elsewhere as needed. But a lot of, like Toby Flenderson, and I think the guy who played Creed, again, both were working on the show, but not as actors, or if they were actors, they were just in the background. They were bodies, so they didn't, have to bring extras onto the set. But eventually, some of these people had great ideas for their characters, and they were able to just bring that to the show. And I think the collaborative effort is part of what makes it so great.
Do you think they knew that, hey, all these characters, they're in the background? Do you think they had plans to bring them in, or do you think at the beginning they were just kind of like, oh yeah, put bodies here?
Right, exactly. It was put people there. I mean, I think literally one of them, it might have been Mindy. It was literally like, oh, there's an empty desk here. Whenever we're shooting Toby, we need someone back here sitting at this desk.
So it's just, it was literally just a happy accident that all those people just happened to have the comedic chops to like, we want to involve you. Cool.
Yeah, or one of the things that I always remember, especially when I'm watching sitcoms nowadays, that I think it was Jenna mentioned, was there's a birthday scene where they're all eating cake, and it was the first time I think she had like done a full day shoot where they were having to eat, and she wasn't thinking about it, and she was actually like eating every piece of cake every time she was on camera.
Not supposed to do that on film.
She was basically on camera for the entire shoot, and she said like by the end of it, like her stomach hurt so bad, and that's when someone was like, "Yeah, let me teach you how to eat on purpose." Yep. So yeah, next time you're watching your favorite sitcom, whenever they're like sitting around eating dinner, they're at a restaurant, just watch their forks.
Yeah,
but usually they're just twisting and moving stuff around and putting like, a tiny little slice of broccoli on their fork and never actually putting it in their mouth.
One thing I just wanted to add, and it's like a little bit of an aside, a little bit of a story, concerning like how you mentioned like the sitcom scripts and how a lot of it was improv. Because again, I'm not sure if they actually film a lot of it beforehand. They might just have the ideas and all the stuff ready to go and film week to week, because there was a show called Absolutely Fabulous, another BBC show, which again, fantastic show. And I remember watching a documentary about it once, and they said the only finished script ever written was the pilot. Every script after that was scribbled on like yellow notepad paper.
Yeah, this was definitely more. This was more structured than that. I mean, each scene had a full script, but there were a lot of times where, whether they were just slip ups or sometimes there would just be a thing where it would be like, Michael Scott insult, and Steve Carell just does whatever. But there was a lot of structure, unlike It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where Rob McElhenney and the other guys basically come in and just say, okay, this is what's starting in this scene, and this is what has to happen by the end of the scene. Go.
Okay. So one of the things I just looked up was like It's Always Sunny premiered in 2005, the same year as the U.S. Office.
I didn't realize. I always thought It's Always Sunny started later.
which is something their first season, from what I remember, was like done for like $200.
I don't know if it was that cheap,
it
but
was shot on like
but it was
Super 8
very...
tape. It was wicked cheap, and it's like it's just a testament to how good the show is, because I love It's Always Sunny.
I love that show.
I love it. But it's like, so one of the things I also wanted to bring up was like, okay, I mentioned Absolutely Fabulous, and a lot of other shows like that, they were filmed in front of a live audience, hence like the laugh track was real and whatever.
Yeah,
The Office was not, and I think I'm almost tempted to say it was one of the first shows that became big
that didn't have a laugh track.
Didn't have
was like
that.
a 7 p.m.
And It's Always Sunny is the same thing. It's Always Sunny it's technically a sitcom because every week it comes out, but it's the way when you look at them, they're not portrayed as sitcoms, because one big thing, like, okay, think of like the Golden Girls, where you are the fourth wall of the house.
Right.
And no one sits on this side of the table and everything. With The Office, and It's Always Sunny, but The Office, because that's the episode. There's three-dimensionality, and it's like the camera roves around and moves and looks around, and like I don't know if that's something.
Talk about that a little bit more. That's one of the really unique things about The Office that a lot of TV shows didn't do, and a lot of hugely popular things did, but only subtly. Like the other big one I think of is like Deadpool, where he's breaking the fourth wall to tell the audience something. The movie, but in The Office, it's and you almost forget that it's documentary style after a few episodes until certain things happen. But there's so many like great moments where Michael Scott will say something and you just see Jim looking straight at the camera.
Right.
And it makes sense because there is someone standing there with a camera in the story, and there are a lot of scenes where we get to hear what the characters are feeling outside of the context when they're being interviewed in the side room,
right?
And telling people their thoughts on it instead of having to infer it you would in most shows.
And I think that actually plays into what a lot of shows did before that. It's just The Office came up with an actual organic reason for the characters to do that, particularly Jim, because it's like he's the one who did it the most. But before that, like, you would get characters, they would crack a joke and then there would be this awkward pause while the audience laughs.
While the audience laughs.
You would get the actor kind of like looking at the audience, and it was just funny because it's like this subtle way of like you're in on the joke. The Office actually had a reason for the character to look at the camera. So it felt so natural.
And it's also one of the reasons that makes Michael Scott's character so entertaining to watch, is because you can tell there are times when he's getting ready to say something and then remembers that he's on camera. Or whenever he tries to do something and doesn't want to be seen, he'll not like just go into his office, but he'll go into the office and close the blinds so the camera can't look in.
Yep. Which is something I remember I discussed with you when you first proposed. Because when you first mentioned doing this episode to me, it's like, I remember asking how often the documentary crew made themselves known. Because I remember there was one clip where it's like, and you confirmed this, where one of the sound guys, like, I think it was Jenna Fisher's character, is like crying about something. And they actually go into the shot to comfort her.
Right.
And it's like, I'm just wondering, like, how often throughout the show are you reminded?
Very rarely. That's one of only a couple. And I can't remember. I know they mentioned it on the Office Ladies podcast, but I can't remember if there are one or two instances where that happens. And I think actually, I might be wrong, but I think the scene where Pam is breaking down, for those few people who haven't seen it, I won't spoil it as to why she's upset. But yeah, like the boom operator, the audio guy actually comes out to comfort her. And I can't remember if Jenna said that was actually in the script or not. It might have just been like,
in the moment, there was so much emotion. He came in.
Exactly, he came in. But there are a couple times where they're doing things and someone will mention, the name of the camera guy, but that's probably not even once a season. It's very rare.
Considering like it's the meta documentary style, do you think they did that on purpose sometimes just to remind the audience, like, hey, this is being filmed? Like,
probably. I think there were a couple times where it was definitely done on purpose. And there are definitely times where, like, you can see, I can give an example because I have one right here. You can kind of, like, see the boom pole, kind of, like, get in the shot, right in the top here. Not often,
Mm-hmm.
but occasionally you do. And the great thing about that is if you were filming any other TV show, you'd have to redo the take.
Have to cut. I was about
to
say
this,
that.
It doesn't matter. If you catch someone's foot with a camera or a cable out of the corner of the screen, that's okay because we know they're filming a documentary.
Yeah, I was going to compare it to like found footage films where it's like you give the cameras to the actors. Of course, it's going to be imperfect. Again, how I said earlier, The Office is like one of the perfect ideas for a cheap network sitcom because it's like everything about it is so economical. But what they do is they take what they have and they run with it. Like this whole meta documentary style, it had never really been done before.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, whenever you're writing for a sitcom, it's not so much nowadays. I mean, there are still network comedies and TV shows, but so many of them are being produced by streaming services nowadays. You've got Peacock, Netflix, HBO, Prime, etc., all producing their own shows, and a lot of them are either coming out once a week or an entire season will just drop all at once.
Mm-hmm.
But back in 2005, when The Office and It's Always Sunny, how do I phrase this question? One of the things you have to consider when you're writing for an audience on cable network is it's more difficult to have a continuous storyline episode to episode because not everyone is going to sit down and watch, a sitcom every single week. And there are constantly reruns of sitcoms, in the evenings as well. Oftentimes, later at like 9 or 10 o'clock, they still show, 4 episodes of Friends at like 10 or 11, I think, on some channels. And so when you have something like that, it's more difficult to have to put in continuous storylines that are central to every episode.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think they handle that when they're writing these? What are some of the considerations?
So, like, looking at The Office, like, Jim and Pam's romance, and, like, Steve Carell's romance with, what's the woman's name? I forget
Jan.
her name. Jan.
And
it's
Dwight
like,
and
Angela's. Angela, yeah. It's like one of the things you do, and they do this in Seinfeld also, because I love Seinfeld, because, again, that's the show about nothing.
Nothing.
And they had the perfect thing. It's like The Office. It's about mundane, everyday things. So every day when you go to work, it's different. So that's the main concern of every episode, this random thing going on.
It's just a day. And it's not like every episode is, consecutive days in order.
But then all that other stuff, all the drama, all the ongoing stuff is in the background. Because I was about to say, one of the kinds of episodes you don't really see in reruns that much are almost like the season finale kind of episodes where all of those plot threads come to a head. So like, I mean, this is a spoiler, but one of the characters leaves at some point midway through.
I think we can talk about it. I think it's been long enough.
Steve Carell's characters leaves midway through the show, and I don't really see that in reruns that much because it's one of those pivotal moments. If it is shown, it's shown.
Well,
like
a lot
of
times you don't even see the later seasons with Will Ferrell and is it Kathy Bates? I always forget her name.
Misery Woman, right? Misery Woman.
Yeah,
I love
Kathy
her.
Bates. Yeah. So and then Robert California, and actually a lot of people really disliked the Robert California character, but I think of all the people that came in to kind of head Dunder Mifflin after Steve Carell, I thought Robert California characters. Well, I mean, he was very uncomfortable to listen to, and he was almost unrelatable at a lot of the times. He brought that same sense of quirkiness and personality of someone that's just so out there that Steve Carell brought, but in a totally different sort of energy. And I did like that, even if his characterable is not likable. Yeah.
I mean, what was it? One of the things I just randomly thought of was like the UK version of The Office. The first 2 seasons, I mean, series, whatever, they end with Ricky Gervais, the boss, being fired. That's why the show, from what I understand, that's what happens at the end of series 2 is he's fired, and that's why it ends.
Because of all of his infractions?
Yeah, his character never really changes. His character, again, I haven't seen it, so I might be talking out of my ass, but his character never changes, whereas Steve Carell's character changes, and that's why the show goes on.
But that's also a difference between British and American shows as well.
America,
a lot of times, a lot of American shows want some sort of redemption
Positivity.
arc.
Yes.
Yeah, they want a redemption arc, not just closure.
Right.
Though there are a lot of shows nowadays that have pushed against that, and I think people are appreciating that because it gets to a point where, well, it's more realistic, and also like if you know that it's going to end up the way you think it's going to end up, it's a lot less exciting trying to figure out how you get there.
Exactly. It's like that's a common criticism for American media and, you know, literature and everything versus international. It's like Americans, someone once said we're obsessed with hope and we're obsessed with the happy ending. And it's like, it is a good thing. But what you see much more frequently overseas and everywhere else, and increasingly here, is what I like to call the bittersweet ending, where it's like, it's happy, but people aren't. The ending's happy, but the people aren't happy.
Right. You kind of leave the show or the movie or the theater or whatever feeling almost unsettled.
Yes. Exactly.
Instead of walking out and just being like, "Oh, I feel great," which you want that. I mean, there's definitely lots of times and places for that, but you don't want it all the time with everything.
Right. Exactly. So like, you know, we mentioned like the Office obviously has a huge cast. I actually don't know how many people are working in the Office at Dunder Mifflin.
It's probably somewhere, you probably have
to the Google
12 to 15 in the Office. You know, you've got the security guard downstairs, but he just works for the building, doesn't work for the office. Then you maybe have like 6 or 7 warehouse employees. So I would guess somewhere in the ballpark of 20.
So I just looked it up on Google. 36 workers work at the Scranton location.
Okay.
And just from memory, this person, poster, said that they had 10 branches. So that's totals about 360 total employees.
Okay, yeah. It's actually more at the Scranton branch than I thought. And we do get glimpses of like the Nashua branch and a couple of the others in later seasons.
So it's a pretty big cast. And I mean, you could never get away with something like that in a film or a limited series, even to an extent, because to get into every character and get to know them.
It's very rare though that you only have like 1 or 2 characters on camera at all times. I mean, the only times you do, I mean, if they're having like a meeting or an interview or something, but for the most part, I mean, at least 6 or 7 people are in every shot. And a lot of the times, I think Jenna and Angela especially, because, you know, she's kind of in the back corner and she's a secondary character. A lot of the times, John is glaring at me in an Angela way, for those of you listening who can't see.
I'm so used to video, I apologize.
But she said that like for a long time, their computer screens just had like paper taped over it that looked like a computer screen, and they couldn't actually do anything on them, and they would have to sit there and pretend they're working while looking at a piece of paper. And she said eventually like they were able to get like Solitaire and Minesweeper and stuff, so they actually had something to do while, you know, they're shooting scenes all day where they have no lines, but they have to be sitting at their desk working.
Oh, I love that, because normally in like when you have like screens and stuff, like TVs on film, so this is
reflection.
Like no, kind of. So it's like a VFX trick. You would put like little green borders in the corners, or you would put like a green tarp over it, not tarp, but paper over it. So that way in post, you could put up like a fake screen. Easily. So it's just so funny that they put that there. So also like if the camera's roving around the office, you'll just see some random workers. It's like they're playing solitaire.
Yep, basically.
Which, on a personal note, I always have a game of solitaire open on my computer. Just when I need to get my mind onto something, I just start playing solitaire mindlessly. I don't know why. Yeah. So, you know, large cast. Do you think, like, what are some of the positives and negatives of having such a large cast? Because, like, I think of, like, the conference room scenes where it's like every character has such a distinct personality. You could look at each of them and you could tell exactly, like, okay, who these people are, what they think, and everything.
A lot of it, when you have a big cast, I mean, it's going to either be beneficial or detrimental depending on the writing. You have to have characters that are different enough, that have their own agendas, their own backstories, even if they're never explicitly stated or even implied in the show. You know, those characters, the people who play Oscar and Kevin, you know, and Creed and Toby and all of these characters that are very popular in the show, but they're not central necessarily as, say, like, Jim and Pam and Dwight.
They still have their moments, right?
They still have their moments. So you have to give them those personalities and those backstories. And if you can do good writing, then a large cast works great. But part of it too is when, again, this is going back to the idea of having a sitcom or a TV show, and it's something that we see in a lot of shows, not just The Office, where the main character decides to leave the show, and they're not written off of the show necessarily, but the actor decides to move on to other ventures, which is understandable. I mean, that happens in all industries, and I've never really looked up as to why Steve Carell left, but I mean, it's not because he did anything atrocious or treated anyone wrongly. I think it was
leave.
Personal endeavors. I don't even think it had to do with where the direction of the show was going, which is a lot of times why lead actors will leave. They don't like the writing.
They want to go on to other things.
But he just wanted to work on other projects. I'm sure he had other things going on. He's in a lot of serious roles, in addition to his comedic side.
Yeah.
But that can have a huge effect on the show, as we saw in this one. They brought in Will Ferrell to replace him, who was a well-known comedic guy from, especially in the 90s, early 2000s. A lot of his movies, you got Old School, a lot of funny classic movies, and that was the first time, I think, where the writing kind of dropped the ball on the new character.
Yep, because it was a completely different persona and a different style. It would be almost like if you replace Steve Carell with Robin Williams or something. You can't just take A and apply it to B. You need to kind of like do something different. And one of the questions I don't actually know is, did Will Ferrell have any input with the writing at that point?
Idea. I'm not sure. I'm going to guess no, but I have no idea. And he was only on for one season, I think. He didn't last long.
Yeah, because I remember watching the episode where Steve Carell left, and then afterwards just hearing like very meh things about the show after that. Like it kind of, everyone wanted to say it
just
lost
kind of lost
the
charm.
Soul.
It lost its charm, I think. But going back to the original question about having a large cast over a small cast, the other good thing about having a large cast on a sitcom is it gives you so much more opportunity for interactions with different characters.
Yes.
You have all the permutations of all the characters in pairs and in 3 of them, or if 4 of them are together, and depending on who you put in the room is going to dictate, where the situation goes. So what might be more difficult when you only have a main cast of, say, 3 or 4, like Seinfeld, is if you're trying to make a certain situation happen that makes sense, with the character's actions. Sometimes it can be difficult to write a scenario that makes sense. But when you have such a large cast of characters, I think it's probably a little bit easier to kind of pick and choose, like, ooh, this person, would have a good witty line, in this situation, or, Kevin can spill the chili to cause, whatever it is to happen. It's something big and ridiculous, but no other character, if they had walked into there with a big pot of chili and dropped it, would have been anywhere near as funny as the guy who sits in the back eating M&Ms all day.
Yep. Just the bag slowly piling up throughout the episode.
So having all of those different characters and personalities just kind of allows a more organic way to, tell a story of The Office for the day, I guess.
It also depends on the type of show, like how you just referenced Seinfeld. You're dealing with 4 very, very... I mean, I'm not saying The Office guys are not talented comedic geniuses, but with Seinfeld, you were dealing with 4 of like the top comedians at the time, and who still are, like Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Veep. It's like they're still at the top of their game.
Right.
And then you had a ton of guest stars who were also comedians, and it's like that show... I don't want to say their personalities were like super solid, but it's like they were all... It's going to sound horrible, but it's almost they were interchangeable at times. Like, you could always rely on all of them to have a quippy line. It was just whether it fit their personality.
Yeah, but that's pretty common.
True. Whereas in The Office, like, there were some characters whose whole shtick was like they had very little humor. Angela. And it's like that was her thing. It's like because of her lack of amusement, that's what made her so funny, because she was like, the Men in Black. It's like everything around her was hilarious, but she didn't think it was so. So that's what made it more hilarious.
Right.
The other only thing I would say that could be negative unless you manage it well with a large cast would be making sure that if they have any like plot threads, making sure they're all resolved.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because that's where like a writer's room would need to like buckle down and say like, okay, these two characters had a.
I was gonna say it probably helps that a lot of the writers were also on
actors.
set every single day because they were acting as well.
Exactly, or
so
like
that also makes it. I feel like that also is part of the reason the show did so well.
Or like, for example, like I don't know if she was involved in the writing process, but Angela's actress is also named Angela. It was named after her, so it's like I don't want to say like that's super huge, but it does add an extra connection to the character. Where it's
even though Angela Kinsey is nothing like Angela in the show, she's a very sweet woman.
I've seen the bloopers of them like breaking out, and it's like she just turns on like a light bulb, and she just like, oh my god. It's so funny, but it's like I've seen like other films, like this might be a horrible comparison, but The Shining, the little boy who's named Danny, the actor's name is Danny, and it's like, first of all, it made directing him much easier because you could just shout out their name.
Especially as a child actor. Yeah.
Exactly, but it also allows for a lot more spontaneity because, like how we were saying, like, oh, there was a lot of improv. Steve Carell or other actors would play into the goofs, play into the gaffes.
Yep.
With Angela or other actors, you can't screw up their names. Because it's like I've seen many bloopers on The Office where it's like they would call each other by their real names. Oh yeah,
people called Jim, or well, he is Jim. It's
John Krasinski.
Wow, yeah, I knew it sounded weird. Yeah, people would call him John all the time.
Yep. So it's like it. I don't know exactly if it was pertinent to like the large cast thing, but it's having the actors be not only the writers on the show, but be deeply involved with their characters, because I'm 100% sure, like, okay, Mindy Kaling, terrific writer, but she probably paid special attention to her character and said, okay, we need to resolve whatever romance is going on, whatever drama is going on. And that helps immensely.
And Mindy Kaling was the drama in The Office.
Oh, yes.
Her character was the one that fed on the drama. She was so much fun.
So one of the things, how I mentioned like writers' rooms, because, you get like this very controlled environment of like 5 or 6 writers, sometimes who are completely disconnected from the show or something. It's very, very different when the people who are actually performing in the show are also writing it, or it's more improv, because then it's like it could be spontaneous, it could be on the fly. And I feel like more care is sometimes given to it,
Yeah. Now, one thing before we want to wrap up that I do want to touch on, because it was something that we mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, is that The Office was, by a lot of standards, kind of a pivotal series when it came to American sitcoms and American, cable network television shows. What do you think it was? What about the landscape changed? With The Office, either at the time of The Office or once it ended,
So I would say my answer is two-pronged. The first is that it took the identity and the look of specialty television, and it brought it down to the network level. So, for example,
what do you mean?
So you got like Showtime and HBO shows where they had production value, and like we talked about, like the camera moving around, and there were locations, and a lot of care given to all the different aspects. But you had to pay a subscription
that were dedicated specifically for TV shows and movies,
right? But they were specialized more in like limited series, or like how the BBC does. Instead of like a 40-episode season, they did a 10-episode season, but each episode was more like a mini movie. Like I think of Queer as Folk. I think that was HBO or early Showtime. Again, each episode was kind of done with care, or Tales from the Crypt, done with care. The Office kind of took that whole idea and kind of like brought it down to the network level, and they got away with it because it was affordable, it was economic, it was quick, fast production time.
And I might answer my own question. I know you have another point to make, but how? I'm just going to play devil's advocate. How is that different from Friends in that sense?
The live audience aspect, first of all.
Okay, right.
So and then also like how I mentioned that fourth wall
a lot of those
thing.
characters were also, a lot of those actors were also well known before they started on Friends, weren't they?
Not much, no, actually.
No? Okay.
They had done like some work, but not a lot. But they were nowhere near as big as they were post Friends.
Right. Yeah. Obviously.
But like how early when I mentioned fourth wall, I think because fourth wall does mean obviously looking at the camera, but also think about sitcoms again, like Friends, Seinfeld, Golden Girls. Where's the fourth wall of the house?
Right.
You are the fourth wall of the house. So it's like the
the
camera always moved like it was a stage play and everything was very stagey, overblown, like big movements.
Right.
Whereas like, again, you got the Showtime and HBO shows, which were, and also like 6 Feet Under, which I believe was Showtime, much more nuanced performances. It started to bring what's called prestige to television. And then you got The Office, which kind of took, again, the network thing, but they wanted to bring a little bit of that prestige in. So I would say that,
and they were able to do it in such a mundane setting.
Exactly, that's part of the reason why.
But yeah,
like
if you look at you see all 4 walls of The Office.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned. Like the camera moving around, like 3-dimensionality. Like you're physically there, but also like you look at the characters' performances. Again, think of Seinfeld or Friends. The characters are big and because they're performing for an audience like a stage play.
Right.
Whereas The Office, it's for a camera where your movements are smaller. It has to be like much more nuanced and careful and much more personal.
And you can whisper and
are you telling me I'm too loud?
I guess. No. No, let's talk about,
Right. Because that's like one of the things as like because film background, one of the things like they teach us about like directing actors is if they come from the stage or sitcoms like television where they perform in front of live audiences, be big. Be bold, like yell loud, no whispering. Whereas if the camera's like right here, you don't have to be like big and comedic, like,
right. You don't have to convey your lines as much with your movements.
Exactly. And then moving on to the second part of my answer, like what The Office did was kind of, it started that trend of, television doesn't have to be hokey. It doesn't have to be big and loud and also lowest common denominator. Now you're getting shows like when you mention like, plot threads and stuff, I think of like that new show like Young Sheldon, where it's like, again, you got the Big Bang Theory, which was filmed in front of the audience and it had the laugh track.
I'll put in right here is like one of it. I guess it's a guilty pleasure. I don't know. I'm not ashamed, but I've seen that show far more times than most people probably have. It's like my comfort show. It's what I put on in the background all the time. Funny enough, I've never watched a whole lot of Young Sheldon. I don't know why. It doesn't grab me quite as much.
I've seen like clips of it, but you put them next to each other, they're completely different styles. Like Big Bang Theory is, again, like the whole sitcom, live audience, camera just going back and forth movement, whereas Young Sheldon has what I would call production value. There are angles, the camera's mounted to a car, and it's like, it's moving, it's going in and out with characters, and it's like, it's a completely different thing. And like, I think the Big Bang Theory started while The Office was rolling. So it's like, you got to see that evolution, because think of how many shows you see now that are super sitcom-y, again, in front of an audience.
Right.
And there's not that many anymore.
No, there really aren't.
And I think part of it, like how I mentioned, like when The Office started, it was filmed on tape. Everything's digital now. Everything's more compact. But they saw the success of The Office, and it's like, ooh, people like this.
Right. Yeah. From a production side, the success wasn't just the writing and the characters, but a lot of it was just the direction of the cinematography.
Yeah. But even the actors as well. It's like just looking at how they perform. It's like it was much more relatable and human. You weren't watching a caricature. You were watching people.
Right.
But no, for your question, what do you think? We'd like to take a brief moment to thank you for listening to Story Weavers. For the enjoyment of our listeners, we want to keep this podcast ad-free and uninterrupted.
If you would like to support us further, check out our options on Patreon. Plus, subscribing will get you behind-the-scenes content, bloopers, access to Book of the Month polls, and more. We appreciate any and all support.
Now back to the episode.
I was going to say pretty much exactly what you said. Though I didn't know, I didn't really, well, I guess I knew, but I never really consciously thought about the fact that, you see all 4 walls in The Office, which you don't in most sitcoms, which again, like I intuitively know that. It's talking about Big Bang Theory, the wall that's behind Sheldon and Leonard's desks, like you almost never see that wall.
And that's why.
Ever. Yeah. Oh, well, on the set, it's not there.
That's why, yeah. Now you know why. But it's like there's actually a joke about that in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It's like a famous scene where it's like all the characters leave because they're talking about like going on a vacation or something involving money. And it's like Will Smith sitting on the couch and the camera pans up and he's like, how are we going to do that if we can't even afford a ceiling? And you see all the studio lights. And it like plays right into that whole thing. It's like, this is all fake.
Yep.
Because it's something you don't think about, but it's pointed out to you, and it's like, oh yeah, it's all a set.
Yeah. No, I was curious to hear what your answers were, mainly because again, I didn't watch The Office when it was live on air. I watched it once it hit Netflix, I think, and I watched it quite a few times once it hit Netflix. But I didn't watch a whole lot of just like running TV shows all the time when The Office was out. I mean, I was in school. For a lot of it. Honestly, the only TV show I really remember from at least like my late teens or early 20s that I would watch every week was 24.
Okay.
Otherwise it was just like, if I was sitting in the family room with my parents and my siblings and we were just like watching TV for an hour or two, I would watch whatever's on. But yeah, I mean, my sitcoms in the early days, it was all, Nick at Night. It was all the old 70s and 80s sitcoms.
Yep.
Jefferson's, Fresh Prince, all that stuff.
Like how you just mentioned 24, that was another show that kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't call that a sitcom really, because
No, it's 100% not a sitcom.
Yeah.
It's definitely it was one of the first series that was similar to like an HBO series. Not just action, but action that was on
a
network.
budget.
Yeah, it was. It had a budget, and it was on a cable network. Usually shows like that would have, you had The Wire or you had The Sopranos, things like that. Those were all on, HBO, Showtime.
Yeah,
things like
specialty
that.
programs.
24 was like those type of shows with that type of production and that type of linear storytelling, where if you didn't see last week's episode, you'd probably, they give you a little, 30-second recap of what happened, but you kind of have to see every episode in order, whereas a show like The Office, you don't have to watch every episode in order, even though there are underlying, like you said, mainly to do with romance.
Yeah, but you don't have to pay attention to them
scenes.
If you don't want to. Like, if you're just watching it to tune out and just like have a few laughs.
Right. And you can infer, what's going on.
That's the other thing with sitcoms. You keep it simple. You don't try to go the complicated Game of Thrones route where it's like, oh, political intrigue and romance and all this. It's like, no, he likes her. He likes her. He likes her. There you go. That's all you need to know.
And not to continue throwing TV shows, because this episode's getting to almost an hour at this point. But there is a show that I think merges both of those worlds very well in terms of having a dedicated, plot to each episode, but there is a long recurring theme, and it's a TV show that has jokes that are referenced, from like a season or two before, lines that were made in passing that then come out like a season or two later, and they make the joke. Do you know what show I'm talking about? It had 3 amazing seasons and then a 4th Netflix season that was like, eh.
I know what you're talking about.
It's about the Bluth family.
Oh, Arrested Development.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I think that when it comes to a show like that, that's able to merge the sitcom type, one episode a week with its own central plot, but along with long running gags, long running jokes, and that's consistent storyline in between episodes. That's one of my favorites. And it was a nice and short one. And they, when Netflix picked it up, like Netflix is done with almost all shows, they'll pick it up and do one final season. And sometimes like they're great, like the New Girl final season. It was a little different. You could definitely tell it was different writing, different directors, but still funny, still kept the core of the show. But Arrested Development kind of took on an entirely different way of telling the story, where they basically took each episode and focused on one character. And my problem with that was the whole point of Arrested Development was the interactions between all of these crazy characters. Same way with The Office. Do you want to watch a show that's just about Jim and Pam? Like, no.
On all of them.
I want to watch a show with Jim and Pam and Dwight, and everyone else.
Exactly. Listener, viewer, whoever you are, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you got some little nuggets, pearls of wisdom from it. And we hope you tune in next time for the next episode of Story Weavers. We're your hosts, John and Dean, and thank you and see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Story Weavers. As ever, we're incredibly grateful to all of our listeners and contributors. Come back next week for the next installment of Story Weavers.